So he posted something on Twitter that has gotten backlash. So here's the situations. This is what I was reading yesterday. Matthew Ramsey, and I don't know who this is, but okay, this person said, is there a systemic barrier? So, I mean, most of us are familiar with how Twitter works. So here, this is a response, and then Ryan goes here. So is there a systemic barrier? Who, what is stopping women from, one, making games, two, pitching games? You also mentioned publishers choosing games. You also feel they are intentionally overlooking women on the basis. Do you think that they are intentionally overlooking women on the basis of their sex? So, and then Elizabeth Hargrave says, I'm not sure this particular commenter is arguing in good faith, but sure, let's brainstorm. So the offer was, let's brainstorm all the possible barriers that might contribute to women having far fewer published games than men. Okay, so Ryan responded, like took the opportunity to, he's the CEO of Alderac, AEG of Alderac, which, I was noticing, I'm not real familiar with that game catalog. Because I was thinking about this even when we were interviewing Ryan Dancey, that, I don't know on all these games behind me and other ones that I have to move to on auxiliary shelf, if I have a lot of AEG games. I mean, I can't really call them off the top of my head. So this is a catalog that I'm not very familiar with, but I mean, obviously it's an extremely productive publishing company, and Ryan is the CEO. So he says, I've taken more than 1,000 game pitches since 2006. I would say that less than 10% of those were from female designers. Effectively, none of them were games AEG would publish. We did call for submissions. So he says, we did call for submissions for female designers specifically, and we got one publishable design. Now, Eliza Hargrave, so that's who he's responding to. So her Mariposas. So that's a game that was published. I looked that up. So that's her game. So after this call for female designers specifically, that AG was looking for, out of that, he doesn't say how many submissions there were, but they got one publisher design, and it was one publishable design, and it was hers. There have been a couple of pitches that came close, most commonly where a female pitched with a male designer. There is one team of 2 female designers that pitched great, but their games are too light for us. I know why we didn't respond with those pitches, but they were at least in the ballpark. We'll read this, and then I'll talk about it later. But this is just what it is. In the ballpark. Typically, when I'm pitched by a female, the game tends to fall in one of several broad categories. 1, it's a game about politics. In general, we don't publish games about politics. 2, it's a party game. In general, we don't publish party games. Or 3, it's a pitch from a designer very early in their design journey, and the game isn't competitive in the modern market. It's usually is either too much like another game or very generic, and it's much more of an idea than game design. I've never been pitched a war game by a female. I've never been pitched a 2-player fighting game by a female. I've never been pitched a giant fighting robots game by a female. I actually don't think that there's much of a market in those categories because there's so much competition, but I wonder if a game designed by a female would be orthogonal to the existing designer patterns and produce something remarkable. I think there is a significant gap when someone decides to try to become a game designer and when they produce their first publishable game. Life in that gap consists of a lot of rejection and negative criticism. I wonder if that gap accounts for a good part of the missing female design cohort. Females are socialized in the West to avoid situations where they're subjected to fairly harsh criticism of their abilities and creative ideas. Males are socialized to take the punches and keep moving forward. Getting across this gap is how you turn someone into a real game designer who gets paid for their work and who makes designs that are attractive to publishers. So far, we haven't seen much award consideration go on to games that exist almost entirely as crowdfunding. Award consideration go to games that exist almost entirely as crowdfunding projects. I know that there are many more females doing game design and production via crowdfunding who just don't connect with publishers. The nature of SDJ, I didn't know what that was. So apparently that is a big game award. It's something in German, right? So it's a award, and it's a German name here for this award. I was not familiar with it. There's a lot out there, even in, there's always more to learn and more to know. So, I mean, I would think that I'm someone who's reasonably in the game board game sphere, but I didn't know about this award. So this is an award. The nature of the SDJ, and apparently a very prestigious one, is that a crowdfunding game is effectively shut out from consideration. So that's what he posted, and then he got jumped. And as I was reading through this the first time last night, I was like, okay, I can tell some things that people are going to, like, what he's going to be swarmed on and I could just see what was happening in the comments before I even scrolled down to it. So what do you think? Let's see. We already have some comments going on. Sable Phoenix says the so-called barriers that women are typically less interested in those types of games than men. Stargate Minds, there's a silent history of male DMs being creepy from the 70s until now, even in the current game stores. It's a stigma for sure. It pushes women away. It's sad. The idea that every field of endeavor should be exactly represented, the entirety of its population demographics, is asinine. Yes, I misspelled asinine on that way on purpose. Good morning, W3 Techie. Good to see you. So Sable Phoenix says, of course he got jumped. You should publish these games anyway, because they're made by women and thus are automatically great. So I knew, so first of all, I knew that since he uses the word female here instead of women. So he talks about female designers and he uses the word female here. But he uses male as well. He uses female and male rather than men and women. I don't exactly know why, but he used male and we should point out, he used female and, as we should point out, male here. He didn't say men and women. So I knew that, okay, so one of the things that that got posted below, there must be a lot of Ferengi references. And then when we scroll down, yes, there are all kinds of Ferengi memes. So he got hit by a whole bunch of Ferengi memes. Yeah, Mike says, the more I learn, the less I know. He kicked a hornet's nest in today's language. Right. So that was one. So I was like, okay, so one thing that he got tons of Ferengi memes, I'm sure. Well, let's just start. So that was one of the first things. So that means, but first of all, he engages with this because he's somebody who is running a major game company. He gets tons and tons of pitches. We had the conversation, the table talk. I spoke with Sydney Engelstein. Remember, and she's from Indie Boards and Cards. And we did a table talk together, and we specifically talked a lot about what it takes to publish a game in today's world. And it's brutal because she's the one who takes pitches for Indie Boards and Cards. And by the time I know, like with the comments, especially we did a rewatch on Crafter's Corner, because we talk a lot about indie publishing and crowdfunding. It's the way that I've brought out all of my products. It's the way that I'm planning on bringing out the ones that I'm creating now. So, in my way of doing things, if you want to do it, you just have to do it yourself. That means not only the creation, but also means the publishing. It means the promotion. It means all of that. But another potential way to do it, and I suppose in an ideal way to do it, once you've done it all yourself, you realize why the publisher is valuable and why you as a game designer or game creator or book writer, book author, or anything like that, where you're doing something, if there's a publisher outlet, there's a publishing outlet for it, why that could actually be a good thing. Yes, it's the system, but why the system, if it's operating and if it's working, why it's good to be part of it and what that actually gives you. So I wanted to, since I'm most familiar with the crowdfunding and self-publication side of things, I thought it was a great idea to talk to Sydney Engelstein about what it takes to get a game published. And her stats are also brutal. I mean, the number of board games that are pitched, the number that are taken for publication. First of all, the number of board games that are published are huge, which means you've got to stand out. But the number of pitches that she receives is gigantic. It is just a fraction of a fraction that actually get published by Indie Boards and Cards. And there are people who are like, why even bother? I know some people are like, I know there's some kind of comments like, Lord, if I were listening to Sydney, there would be no board game submissions because it's that brutal and that unlikely to get something to happen. So they, yeah, it's highly unlikely to get a board game published. It's highly unlikely. But he's one of the ones who does it, so that's why he's chiming in. There was the call to brainstorm, so he chimes in here. And he does say that there was specifically a call for female designers, and we got one publishable design. Now, on the other hand, and it was hers. But on the other hand, that doesn't surprise me. Like, how many, what was it like, Sydney stats? How many submissions does it take to get one publishable game? I wish I had looked this up specifically, but if you look up Sydney Engelstein, that was a fantastic discussion. I mean, 50, 100, right, submissions in order to get to one publishable design. I wish we knew how many submissions were there. Stargate Mind says, the day I released my title, Women of Waterdeep title, a tribute to women, Twitter jumped me, causing 200K negative posts. None of them even read the publication. It was pure title discrimination. Zero Theory says the use of female is often a bit sterile and clinical, and saying males can take the punches is explicitly saying that women can't.